This is part 2 of a video series on Sanderson's character sliders, a writing tool created by author Brandon Sanderson for designing and analyzing characters. Part 1 provided an in-depth overview of the tool, complete with examples, and in this video, we will look at how the tool can be used specifically for character introductions and character arcs. First, a quick recap from Part 1. Sanderson's character sliders breaks a character down into 3 major characteristics. Likability is how relatable, sympathetic, or nice a character is. Competence is how capable or skilled a character is. And proactivity is the degree to which the character progresses the plot. These characteristics are represented by slider bars, which can range in value from low to high. In general, audiences are more likely to connect with the character if they are high in at least one slider. With that background, let's look at how the character sliders can help with designing and analyzing character introductions and character arcs. Spoiler warning for Guardians of the Galaxy 2, Megamind, Frozen, Game of Thrones, and Avatar: The Last Airbender. When we looked at the character sliders in Part 1, they were used as a general, overall representation of the character. But it's actually quite helpful to split the character up into their introduction and their character arcs, and have different sets of sliders for each. When a character is introduced, the audience forms a first impression, which can be represented as a set of character sliders. Once the story is underway, the character may have a character arc, in which case it can be represented with before and after sets of character sliders that maps the character's transformation through the story. Let's start by looking at character introductions. One of the main objectives when introducing an important character in the story is to hook the audience and make them care about the character. With respect to the character sliders, this means at least one of the sliders should be high so that the character is more likely to come across as engaging. For ideas on how to manipulate the sliders to be low or high, refer back to the Part 1 video. I find that the type of connection the audience has to a character is often related to which of the 3 sliders is high. If the likability slider is high, the audience is likely to connect with the character through a sense of empathy. If the competence slider is high, the audience is likely to connect through something like a sense of fascination, wonder, fear, or respect. If the proactivity slider is high, the audience feeds off the character's energy and the action, progress, and conflict they generate. First impressions form quickly, so whichever of the sliders is going to be high, it's often best to highlight that characteristic early on so that the audience has time to latch on to it. If the character's exciting hook can't be moved earlier in the story, foreshadowing it is coming or finding additional aspects of the character to hook the audience early on is important for maintaining interest long enough to get to the cool reveal later on. If early in the story the audience isn't connecting with a character or they feel bored by the character, it typically means they weren't sufficiently hooked by the introduction. This is where Sanderson's character sliders can be used as a troubleshooting exercise. Focusing on just the introduction of the character in the story, score the character's likability, competence, and proactivity. I have a worksheet available for free on my website that can help with this. If the audience isn't finding the character engaging, there is a good chance that the character will either be low in all 3 sliders or they fall into one of the special cases discussed in Part 1, which is high in proactivity but so low in likability and competence that the character comes across as annoying instead of engaging. It's possible this is how the character is designed to be, but more likely, especially if it's a main character, it means something didn't work out with the execution. As part of the troubleshooting, see if you can identify what the writer was going for with the character, and maybe why it didn't come across as intended. For example, a common source of disconnect is a character who is designed to be likable because they're funny, but the humor isn't working. If you're a writer and you're receiving this sort of feedback about your characters, this can be a helpful exercise as well. Consider asking a few trusted readers to score your characters on the 3 sliders to see if your audience is interpreting the character's introduction the way that you intended. Another objective with a character introduction is to set audience expectations for the character and the story. They may have expectations for the character, genre, plot, setting, tone, and themes of the story based on how the character is portrayed in their introduction. When an audience meets a new character, they often start anticipating what's to come. If you've ever been watching a movie or reading a book, met a new character and had the thought, "That guy's definitely gonna die," or "I bet those 2 end up together," or she did it, she's the murderer. Something in that character's introduction set up that expectation in your mind. Audience expectations upon meeting a character aren't a bad thing. It helps the audience feel like they know what's going on. It gives them some solid footing while they absorb other elements of the story, like world building or complexities of the plot. And the early impressions on the audience helps them determine if this is a story they will enjoy and want to invest in. Not only can expectations be helpful for the audience, but they can also be useful for the writers themselves. Understanding the promises that are being made to the audience is crucial if a writer is going to pay off those promises and deliver a satisfying story. Audience expectations also gives a writer something to play off of. They can fulfill or twist or subvert those expectations. So setting audience expectations should often be one of the goals of the character introduction. Sanderson's character sliders can help a writer set those expectations, as different slider configurations tend to trigger different audience expectations. For example, a high likability, low competence, high proactivity character can set the expectation of an everyman archetype, who has a leveling up character arc to increase their competence. A low likability, high competence, and proactivity character can set the expectation for an anti-hero archetype, who will find a cause they believe in, find friends or a love interest who brings out the best in them, and will soften and become more likable. A high likability, high competence, low proactivity character could be a mentor. They will pass on knowledge to help the protagonist increase in competence, and then will probably disappear from the story, so the protagonist is forced to go it alone. A good rule of thumb is that the audience will typically anticipate movement on the slider bars. So if a character is low on a slider, they will often expect a story arc increasing that aspect of the character. And if they're high on a slider, there will be a suspicion that that aspect of the character will decrease. Now, writers don't have to write the story that the audience expects. Oftentimes, they'll try to do the opposite. But the ability to set those audience expectations through an effective character introduction allows the writer to control the expectations and use them to their advantage. For more examples of slider configurations and some of the characters that result, refer back to the Part 1 video. That's it for character introductions. Let's move on to character arcs. As mentioned before, character arcs often revolve around movement of one of the sliders. This may be a character increasing one of their sliders, like Scrooge or Nebula, increasing their likability, Chuck Bartowski or Imhotep, increasing their competence, or the Ents in Lord of the Rings, or the Raptors in Jurassic Park, increasing their proactivity. Character arcs do not have to have a large swing from low to high to be satisfying. A small amount of movement on a slider can be a highly satisfying arc if the story establishes why even a small change in the character is significant. Nebula, for example, has only a slight shift in likability when she reconciles with her sister Gamora, but because we've seen her anger and hatred towards her sister, this small shift has significant emotional weight to it. A character arc can also be a decreasing of a slider, like Anakin Skywalker or Harvey Dent decreasing their likability, Wesley or Magneto decreasing their competence, or Metro Man or Jafar decreasing their proactivity. A villain's arc often includes a sudden decrease in competence or proactivity at the end of the story, as they are stripped of their power or locked away by the hero. Characters can also have more complex arcs, with movement both up and down on a slider. Lando Calrissian starts off fairly likable, has his likability plummet, and then rebounds to become highly likable at the end of the story. Character arcs can also have movement in multiple directions across multiple sliders. Daenerys Targaryen starts off high likability, low competence, and low proactivity. She reaches a peak in the middle of the story where she is high in all three sliders, and then in the final moments goes mad and her likability plunges. She has movement on all three sliders, and interestingly, her final slider configuration is a mirror inverse of her starting configuration. As a writer, I appreciate the symmetry of this character transformation, and I think it's a fascinating thing to try and pull off, even if I wasn't a fan of the execution in this particular instance. Which brings me to the next point. Changes to a character can be incremental or sudden. Incremental changes allow the audience to enjoy the process of growth over time, or experience the tension as the character descends. Sudden changes, however, can be shocking and exciting in the moment. A secret reveal of a character's hidden motives that flips the likability slider, or the emergence or disappearance of powers or abilities in a time of need that moves the competence slider, or characters who shift from active to passive or passive to active in a key moment. The best sudden character transformations manage to be exciting while also feeling inevitable in retrospect. This is done by weaving subtle foreshadowing leading up to the moment of transformation so that the reveal feels like it's paying off promises that were made earlier in the story. One final observation. The slider configuration at the start of a character arc does not have to match the sliders from the character introduction. It is common for the character introduction to show the character one way to hook the audience, but then the context shifts, often due to the inciting incident, and now we see the character's likability, competence, and proactivity as it specifically relates to the conflict they now face and the character arc they are about to undergo. So that concludes part 2 of our series on Sanderson's character sliders. Hopefully, you now have a new tool in your writing toolbox for designing and troubleshooting character introductions and arcs. If you would like to download the character slider worksheet, it's available for free on my website. Links to Brandon Sanderson's BYU lectures and the Writing Excuses podcasts about the character sliders are posted in the description of this video. If you found this video helpful, be sure to like and subscribe so you'll be notified when future videos are released. Until next time.